Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Rowing Chat, the podcast for rowing fans around the world. I'm Rebecca Caro, and you can get all of the episodes for Rowing Chat and a weekly email of new episodes that we publish at our website, rowing.chat. If you also would like to use our rowing directory, where we've curated a list of all of the rowing businesses that we can find in 16 separate categories, from oars and accessories through to boats, gifts, coaching, all sorts, software, as big software category, go to rowing.chat and then click the word directory in the top menu. Now, today, I'm delighted to welcome as my guest on Rowing Chat, David Hickey. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very good to have you here, David. And I gather that you and I have sort of nearly overlapped in a couple of different rowing clubs over our past career. Where are you rowing now?
Well, to the extent that I'm in my rest years, I'm not doing an awful lot. I'm planning to get back to it. I'm a member of two clubs, Tideway Scholars, and also Walbrook, which is up at the higher up the river, as it were. I do a little bit of sculling out of each. I need to do a bit more, frankly. So maybe this season I get back to it.
You may know that we're in lockdown here in New Zealand, and level 3, the rowing clubs are still closed. But if you have a private craft, as one of my friends does, has her own single, and she keeps it on her back lawn. And yesterday I went out for the first outing since the 26th of August, and I have 4 blisters.
Yes, I can imagine.
Now, before we launch into why you're here as my guest, David, tell us a little bit about your background in rowing.
It started when I went into university. And it started by accident, in that I went in the front gates at the Freshers' Week, and all the various clubs and societies had all their fetishes on display. And being pretty shy and unfamiliar with all of this stuff, I was slinking around, trying to avoid everybody's eye, until I spotted a wonderful boat, a beautifully varnished wooden four, with 4 beautifully varnished oars sitting across it. And my father, having done a little bit of amateur furniture making, we didn't have any money in Ireland in those days. I went up and had a very good look at this boat, because he'd always said to me on furniture, to spot a good piece of furniture, a good cabinet maker, good carpenter, if there were screws involved, have a good look to make sure that they're all in exactly the same line. And this beautiful boat must have had 100 screws, brass screws, all facing the same line. So I was admiring this, and this lovely man came over to me and said, "You could sit in it at the weekend." And a little bit aggressively, I said, "Why on earth would I want to do that?" And he said, "Because I think you would be good at it." Now, this was a man sadly since died called Tom Noble. And if ever a chap were blessed with an appropriate surname, it was Tom. He left university when he finished. He went up to Northern Ireland, set up a school that straddled the religious divide up there, with a lot of opposition. But his view was that if he could get the kids living and working, and their parents living and working and teaching and so on together, it might help break down some of the difficulties. Be that as it may, Tom convinced me to go down to Island Bridge, where Dublin University Boat Club operates, on a Saturday morning. And that was September 1973. And it's been pretty much downhill since there, frankly. Well, that was the start.
Your experience mirrors mine. And the reason I will reveal to all of our listeners as to why David is here with me today is because he has written a book about his rowing life. Have you got a copy of it to wave in front of the camera?
Funnily enough, I do.
And it's called The Trinity College VIII, Rowing for the Ladies' Plate. There we are. A glorious picture. Is that actually your crew at Henley?
No. But there is no shortage of photographs, I'm sorry to say, of our crew within the book, lowering the tone significantly.
Oh, I think that's a very, very harsh assertion. And also they're a little grainy because, of course, they are mostly from the 70s. But this was your lockdown project. I'm intrigued. What on earth made you think I'd like to write a book about my student rowing days?
Well, the first lockdown, I spent a fair bit of time watching Netflix. when in the UK the second lockdown started in October, I said to myself, I really ought to do something constructive. So I said I would learn Spanish and I'd write the book that I'd been idly thinking about. After about 10 minutes listening to the tapes, I was able to say, dos cerveza, por favor.
Which is handy.
Well, I thought that made me fluent. So I didn't need to do anything more in that language, frankly. So then it came to the book. And I sat down and I wrote a raft of different stories of the various events that took place, some to do with rowing, some to do with other mad student adventures. And I suppose I spent about 6 months writing late at night. And then in the end, assembled it into a book. And to my surprise, it was about 56,000 words, which seemed to be what would be required. I was then very lucky because one of the crew members had something like 300 photographs taken over the 4 or 5 years in the 70s when we'd both been rowing. And he very decently gave me permission to use any and all of them.
How unusual that nobody had cameras. Well, exactly. Very few pictures.
Exactly. And there were some fantastic photographs, many of which are in the book. Not 300, I hasten to add. But that really was when I did it. I think why I did it was a little bit different. Rowing used to be an elite sport. It's a lot less elite these days. But if you're born without necessarily superb hand-eye coordination, then ball sports may not necessarily appeal, or you may not be much use to them. And if you're not that interested in track and field, as I wasn't, but you'd still like to do some sport, rowing is a wonderful sport. So it seemed to me, if I could just sort of widen the net of people getting interested in the sport by writing a light-hearted book about it, I might do some small little bit of good. That was part of it.
Right.
And I guess the other dominant motivator was the fact that the rowing club at Dublin University, for me, it sort of in many ways made my life, because it gave me some physical strength. It gave me some mental strength, as racing does. I met my wife through it because she rowed. And in many ways, as I say, it formed my life. And I thought it might be nice to do something and give something back. And therefore, I have agreed with the publisher that 50% of the list price of the book, if it's purchased through Dublin University Book Club shop, will stay with the men's and women's clubs. So we're desperate, therefore, to try and get people to buy the book, not for any reasons for my benefit, but for the benefit of the rowers, future rowers in Trinity College. It's the nomenclature is slightly confusing. Dublin University Boat Club and Trinity College. It's rather like Oxford and Balliol, or Cambridge and Christ College and so on. So sometimes I will say Dublin University and sometimes I'll say Trinity, but it's the same edifice basically.
So I'm looking now desperately to try and find the correct URL to share with our listeners. And I found Dublin University Boat Club website, but I can't find their shop. I will put the link up in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. That would be great. And as I say, it sells at €20 and the equivalent in local currencies wherever, and 50% of that through the generosity, if you like, of the Liffey Press. David Givens, who is the publisher, he has allowed us to make that offer available.
Well, that is absolutely fantastic. So for listeners, it's duboatclub.com/book. So I will also put that in the show notes, and that's where to go and buy it. So out of preference, people, please buy it there. The students are going to be mailing it out. They will ship anywhere in the world. Is that right?
Yes, it'll take them a little bit of time, but we do know there's a bunch have gone to Canada, for example, successfully. Okay. So New Zealand shouldn't be a challenge.
Now, before then, David, had you ever written anything?
Yes, I had. I'd written some light-hearted stuff for a motoring magazine because I'm a bit of a petrol head, off and on. And my work in financial services required me to do a lot of technical writing. So writing chairman's statements, writing reviews of the year and all that sort of stuff. So writing has always come relatively easily to me. And therefore, that really wasn't a challenge. And in fact, it was a real delight to be writing about something that I really loved and enjoyed, as distinct from something I had to do by a particular deadline. So it was a pleasure, to be honest. The only problem now is I'd love to do it again, but I've run out of copy. I've nothing to write about.
Clearly time to start rowing again and start writing books about masters rowing, because to be honest, I've always thought that the whole point about masters rowing is half of it is the rowing and half of it is the chat on the bank or in the coffee shop afterwards. And that's where you get your stories.
That's true. That's true. Mind you, there is an opportunity looming. One of the companies that I'm involved in currently tends to do something sporty every year for charitable purposes. And the chief executive rang me last night and he said, are you doing much in August of next year? I said, probably. Why? And he said, oh, because we're putting together a little challenge, which I think you might be interested in. I said, go on. And he said, well, you know that we're a UK operation, but we're looking to buy some companies in Ireland. So in honor of that, he said, and we're going to pick a nice charity. We've decided we're going to row from Wales to Ireland.
Oh, like you do.
Like you do. 24 hours, no sliding seats. So it's a back-breaking exercise. And to be absolutely honest, I said to him, you are out of your mind. And he said, yes, but we're doing it anyway. And I got your name down.
I was going to say, did you offer to Cox? Because I think that's probably the only seat you'd want in that boat.
Yes, I think so. Eight seaters. And apparently, actually, you rotate. And you do some coxing, you do some rowing, you do some resting, and then you do some more rowing again. So if I can find 7 incredibly young, long, fit, strong people, it'll work well. If they're all in my condition, we'll be out there for a year.
Well, as a member of Walbrook, you'll know Jock Wishart, and he rode to Paris with a friend of mine, Chris Jones. They used one of those Thames cutters. I think they went London to Paris.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And yes, you're right about the sore bums. That's definitely on the cards.
Oh, well.
Jock would coach you. I'm sure Jock would coach you.
Yes.
Now, your writing style is just wonderfully fluent, conversational. I hear the accents of the various people from all different parts of Ireland. Yours presumably is somewhat modulated nowadays in your writing. And I'm just intrigued as to how many drafts you had to do to make it. I'm going to be really outright here. Unlike most rowing books, it's really, really well written. It's not a dull biography. This is a rollicking ride through the student, at least you didn't have a toga party, but the student rowing scene is exactly the same in every single university across the world. The nuances, obviously, are a little more subtle. But I was reading the book going, I did that. I remember someone doing that. And plus personally, I learned to row at university as well. So all the experience of the very, very beginning, it's just delightful. And I'm intrigued as to how many, do you hear the words in your head? Did you have to rewrite it many times?
I wrote it in a whole series of segmented events. And so it wasn't a question of sitting down with a blank book and filling in the sheets of paper. It was a question of just writing down everything in no particular order. And then when I had everything written down, I decided to assemble it in a sort of date order, as it were. And that then, it sort of, out of that fell the chase for the ladies' plate that we sought to win in 1977, having started in 1975. And it sort of fell into place, to be honest. I didn't find it difficult. The stories were in my mind, the events were in my mind, and the photographs provided by my crew member, David Sanfey, really helped. He very kindly read it for me before we released it anywhere, because he's a lawyer, retired recovering lawyer, as he describes himself now. And I didn't want to be done for libel. So I asked him to read it. He read it and then came back and said, nobody outside the crew is going to sue you and they don't matter. I thought, marvelous. So that was one. My wife then took it at the very end and did a read through it. And thank goodness she did, because she picked up some grievous errors, which we corrected. We didn't get them all done, There's still one or two silly mistakes in it, but so I had to do corrections and rewrites and so on slightly as we went through it. And then I had a very good friend who read it, and he said to me, "I've put the final too early in the book. Keep the tension running." And the various other rowing events, such as the Masters competitions and so on, he said interpose those, but make sure that the final race in the final year is towards the end of the book, which was great advice. So I was lucky that some very good people read it very carefully. I have a sister who's a journalist. She read it critically. She was very helpful. And that basically, it needed a little bit of correcting. I had to take some names out of some of the events because otherwise folk would have been arrested. There were a couple of serious events took place where I had to take the names out of two people who were involved in security forces. And even today, it would not be smart for them to be readily identified.
Yeah.
So in truth, it almost wrote itself, to be honest.
Well, you obviously not only have an incredibly good memory for the events that happened, and frankly, I don't care if you fictionalize them. They're delightful to read. And the writing style is just nicely lyrical and not too heavy-handed. And the speech from the mouth of a 19-year-old boy is never, ever massively articulate. And it just brought it all flooding back to me.
I have to confess, sadly, all those events are true. That's the really worrying thing about it.
Why didn't the Irish come and race us? I mean, goodness, we could have had a lot more fun if we'd raced against a club like yours.
Hopefully one day.
Would you read something from the book for us?
I would be very happy to read a little bit about the first time when I was a novice, and there was an 8 put together of us all at the time. And we went out to the west of Ireland for the first 6-lane race that we had ever experienced. The heading is Fog, Bog and Water, which will give you some idea of the local conditions. And it goes as follows. Later that season, sometime in May, we went off to a regatta somewhere west, out near where I'd spent some years in my youth. No one had told them out there that spring had sprung. The day combined freezing cold fog with a drizzle of sleet on top, as they say in the finest recipes. We dutifully rowed to the starting stake boats at the edge of the reeds in the big wide lake for our first ever 6-lane race. Well, there were supposed to be 6 lanes, but since there were no buoys, it was anyone's guess where on the lake the lanes were actually hiding. And in any event, the thick fog precluded any decent visibility. It was actually quite eerie. We sat shivering in our cotton tops and baggy woolen shorts until the starter got around to calling us up for our race. The regatta was late. It was hours late, and the poor old starter chap had been out there all day. He was, however, well equipped with a shotgun, which he used to ensure that all crews on the course heard the start at the same time, regardless of the level of sleet or fog. Clever, really. What was not so clever was that he was also well equipped with a bottle of Jameson's finest 10-year-old, purely to keep the cold out, you will understand. As the day wore on, the level in the bottle declined, as did the elevation of the starting gun. By the time we approached the stake boats, it seemed to me to be aimed directly at Roger, cowering in the cox's seat. Of course, the next discharge from the declining gun did not actually hit anyone when it went off to mark the start of our race. But what it did do was to disturb a nearby swan, who instantly assumed that Roger had caused the deafening roar and set off to discuss the matter with him. They're pretty large birds all in all, and this fellow was big and mean-looking and moving fast. He was traveling just above the water, as they do, with that unique loud whooshing sound as his giant wings beat up and down. And leading the charge was his orange-tipped spear aimed right at us. Sitting facing Roger in the stroke seat, and more importantly facing the swan, I drew his attention to the encroaching bird. He turned round to see for himself, and a millisecond later he was screaming, "Power 10" at the crew. I was only too happy to raise the rate to levels never seen before in our poor old clinker called Hazel. You see, it had quickly occurred to me that once Roger no longer formed a human barrier to this enraged trumpeter, I was next on the Swan's menu du jour. I had never before thought much about swans, but as the giant wings powered him ever closer and the rude beak thrust nearer and nearer, I decided this was not the moment either. We had not quite finished the first count of 10 when Roger was already screaming for another, and so, demonstrating all the coordination of a demented egg beater with 8 dislocated whisks, we took off down the course, flailing away until the white avenging angel decided we had been warned enough. He faded back into the fog. It was hardly a surprise when we were declared the winners. "We should bottle that fucker and use him in every race," said our delighted bowman as we were presented with unexpectedly decent pewter tankards. It was all right for him. He was somewhere up on the bows, several swan feasts away. In some years, my first year, year zero as I've called it, was the best year. We didn't know what we didn't know. We knew we didn't know lots, but we also knew there was time next year to learn more. Meanwhile, we were content just to mill around the place before the rowing and do the same afterwards. They were a fun crew, it was a fun club, and being the dregs, we had no duties or responsibilities. No pressure. Boy, was that about to change.
Which obviously shows so delightfully how you lead one anecdote into a hint of what was likely to follow. That was very vivid.
It was very what?
Vivid. That's
Vivid.
Swan.
It was certainly vivid to be there, with that darn thing getting closer and closer. I don't think Roger has ever recovered from it.
Poor Roger. I'm amazed, though, that you'd managed to spot, the starter in the fog, and the fact that he was armed with a bottle of whiskey.
Well, something had to account for the fact that the gun was going down and down and down as the day wore on.
Wow. So that was one of the anecdotes that obviously your recollection brought to the fore. But your novice year passed, and what actually formed the genesis of this quest for a really elite trophy in the form of the ladies' plate at Henley Royal Regatta?
Somebody had worked out that in 1875, Trinity had won the ladies' plate. And in the succeeding 100 years, they had never won it. They'd come close on a few occasions, but they'd never actually attained it. So the captain in 1975 decided, wouldn't it be nice to put a crew together and have a go at it? And so we did. And we managed to get some money for some new equipment. We got some new coaches, and we put together a feasible plan. And it all looked really going very, very well indeed until we got to the first race on the first day and got knocked out.
So much for the anniversary, or the centenary, I should say.
And something I think clicked in that crew, 7 of whom went on to race in successive years. Something needed us. And I think what it was we got knocked out by Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who were a good crew. They didn't win it, but in order to beat them, the finalists had to break the record at the time. So it became obvious to us that actually we were really quite a reasonable crew. And therefore we thought we might have a good chance at it if we went again next year. So we had a crack the following year. And it was explained in the book how we did there. Insufficient to win it in 76. And so we had to go back a third and final time. That really was going to be the third time. Fellows had to get on and start working. Couldn't continue to row. It was an amateur sport, clearly, in many ways still is, but it was not amateurish, if you see what I mean. So the time taken to train and to row and to focus on it precluded working. So if one had to go out and work for a living, it precluded rowing. So By the time we got to 77, it was going to be our last year. We knew that.
And have you got a little bit of your book to read us about that Ladies' Plate campaign?
I'll read the 76 bit, and there are two parts to it. Now, we had gone to Nottingham each year in 74, 75, 76, 77 to get some racing experience in the UK and get some feeling for the likely opposition. And in 1976, we went back, having won in 75 and having won in 76. And then in 1977, we went back fully expecting to win again. So this very brief part tells you actually what happened in 1977, and it's headed up Nottingham and Durham. The 1976-77 academic year had gone past in a blur. The racing season came around so quickly, it was hard to believe that yet again we were lining up for Henley. There was no doubt about this campaign, however. It would be the final attempt by this crew. So, again, we took in Nottingham Regatta en route. We looked around at Nottingham for the opposition, being somewhat fearful of giant Americans who had knocked us out in Henley in the preceding 2 years. Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 75, and confusingly, Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut in 1976. We didn't notice any crew that seemingly spelled trouble for us. And feeling quite comfortable, and with the boat moving well within the targeted times for the set practice distances of 500 and 1,000 meters, we looked forward to the final. We knew it would confirm our superiority at Nottingham. Did it hell? We had a rotten row. No rhythm, too much rushing, all of us desperately trying to lever forward a boat, seemingly stuck in grandma's treacle pudding and refusing to play. We got beat. We could not bloody believe it. A crew from Durham University had come in ahead of us. Who the hell were they? And where had they come from? Other than from Durham, obviously. What was worse, we discovered that they were lining up confidently for the Ladies' Plate at Henley the following week. Not again. So that led us to the semi-final. Now, Rebecca, do you want me to read a bit about that?
Yes, please.
The loss to Durham and Nottingham had been a serious wake-up call. After the successes there in previous years, losing had come out of the blue. In parallel, having had such a fast time for the first race in Henley that year, we realized that we now had a target on our backs, but Durham might turn out to be this year's problem. Sitting at the start, waiting for the familiar routine, I didn't feel the usual nerves, even though I knew that this was likely the real final for us. We'd seen no one else capable of beating us apart from this crew. Most of us knew that if we won this race, barring a severe accident, we would be in the final and we could well secure that oh-so-elusive target of the Ladies' Plate for Trinity College Dublin. We also knew it would probably end our rowing careers as other less attractive and arguably less professional but more money-making careers beckoned. None of us had any real family money behind us, so we'd have to work for a living. Rowing at that level required such a commitment that pursuing a working career in parallel would not have been an option. There was therefore a coldness emanating from the crew as we settled into the boat and drew away from the launch slips at Henley heading for the start. I think we all realized that this race also marked the culmination of 4 years of dedication for many of us, and even more years for several of the crew. There was a real sense that what we could have had last year, but was somehow beyond us, was not beyond us this year, and we mustn't lose it. Both crews started the race cleanly, but as we passed the first marker, our noses were in front. At the barrier, 2 minutes or so out from the start, we were rowing to our potential and were further ahead. It didn't feel like we were struggling to maintain rate or power. As we went up the course, we were clearly leading, but only by a length. Both crews were moving well, and we knew we were not safe. The power in our boat was consistent. The run was good. There was no evidence of anyone losing concentration and rushing up the slide to the catch, but still we couldn't shake them. It was then our cox, Jarlath, simply said, "Remember Nottingham. Get away from them." It was a brilliant call at a brilliant time, being halfway through the race. He knew we needed to kill off any hope they might have of mounting a dash at the finish. I think it was almost venom that I could feel coming into the boat as we all hardened on further. In the stroke seat, John Mackin took the rate up very slightly, looking to match the power lift, and ever so gently, we started moving away. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't sudden, but it was consistent. As every stroke came and went, we started to squeeze the life out of their race and their hopes. And to me, this typifies the requirement of being able to race in this sport at a serious level. During the race, at a time of maximum physical stress, when the body is screaming for oxygen, when all the muscles are under the severest of strain, not only must the technique of handling the oar be maintained identically by each rower in the boat, but the thinking brain has to be decoupled from the pain-screaming physical body to maintain control, to adjust a rate, even to decide to change nothing. We came into the enclosures in that race near the finish, 2 lengths clear. And if anything, we were moving a little further away with each stroke. We went through the finish line and eased off the power, but kept rowing. We were making the point that we could have done more. There were no winning screeches or water slaps or even collapsing back onto the legs of the man behind. We kept moving. We had one hand on that old lady's jug, but we were still taking nothing for granted. How's that?
That is marvelous. And it so cleverly brings in the non-rower who's never experienced a race to explain the sort of tension and pressure that you're under in a race situation.
Well, I think it's the epitome of it, is to be able to think while you're under the physical pressure. And as I said, to decouple the brain, which I think takes years of practice, to be able to do it and do it consistently. Which is why it's a wonderful sport, because it does develop you physically, clearly, but it also develops you mentally, because you end up being able to think under pressure. And at various stages in life, we all come under pressure at different stages, and to be able to think in parallel at a critical time it's important, I think.
I've often thought that the military are probably the only other profession where that's an obligation as part of their learning.
Yes, that rings true. That rings true.
Now, David, thank you so much for being my guest here today. For all of our listeners, you will not regret buying this book. It's going to be the Christmas present you're going to give to everybody. And it is a fundraiser. So as a reminder, the place to buy it is duboatclub.com/book. And the students will post it anywhere in the world. David, any final words of encouragement?
Don't stop rowing. There was a lovely event. We were at the Masters in, I think it was Munich, and some years ago, and we all had to write down our names, ages, identities, and all this sort of stuff, which meant, of course, that the organizers knew the age of everybody there. And there was a little welcoming ceremony at the commencement of the regatta, and they had located the eldest competitor, who was late 80s, early 90s or something. And they did a quick little interview with him. And I remember distinctly, he was an English gentleman. And the interviewer said to him, what is it these days you find most difficult about the sport? And the answer was getting in and out of the damn boat.
Yes. That comes as no surprise to me whatsoever. I was privileged at one Henley Masters regatta to watch some entrants into the gentlemen's single sculls, where the starting age was 80 and they had 4 men all racing that.
Wonderful. No, it's a good sport. It's a great sport, particularly, as I say, for those who are not interested or able in hand-eye coordination for ball sports or track and field. It's a wonderful alternative, and the more people do it, the better.
For sure. I can wholeheartedly endorse that. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining me on this rowing chat with David Hickey, the author of the Trinity College VIII. Please follow us online. You can pick up all of our podcasts at any podcast app or at rowing.chat, which is our website address. Till next time.